Shokun! Welcome to Igor's Dojo, the training ground for honing your Japanese language skills. The topic of today's video is one of the most important ones when it comes to learning Japanese. Verb types, verb stems, and their formation. The importance of verb stems and their proper usage cannot be stressed enough, and they play an essential role in the entire process of mastering the Japanese language. We will divide the topic of our today's lesson into three important categories, as you can see. In the first, I will present a summary of the Japanese verb types and talk about them in detail to illustrate, firstly, the clear differences between them and also some of their defining features. The second category will cover the overview of verb stems along with some of their most frequent usages, as in which verb forms they play a big part. Here I would like to highlight one thing that many of you probably already know, if not all of you, but there is nothing wrong with repeating. Verb stems are not the same thing as verb forms, but rather the foundation or the building blocks for forming the verb forms, such as the passive verb form, the potential verb form, and etc. So in short, we use stems to create verb forms. They are not the same thing. And the third section will cover the creation of the stems through an simple process of taking an example in its infinitive or the dictionary form, and you can find this form in any online dictionary or in a classic book dictionary, and by adding, subtracting, or changing a part of it, we will get the desired stem. In fact, the stem formation process can be best summarized as a game of dropping or replacing the final syllables of the verbs to get new stems, and like any other game, it is best mastered through practice and repetition every day. Now we are moving on to our first big section, and that is the verb types in the Japanese language. I know that the table before you looks intimidating a bit, but do not worry, most of the information provided here is to ensure that we cover all the bases and terms that you may come across during your studies. The most important thing here is to note that there are three groups of verbs. The first are Ichidan verbs ending in iru and eru. Then we have Godan verbs having the most distinctive and numerous endings, as you can see, mu, su, bu, ru, u, ku, nu, tsu, and gu. And finally, there are the irregular verbs or the fukisoku doshi, of which there is only two, suru and kuru. Before moving on, I would like to address the alternative names of the first two groups, since they are derived from their distinctive manner of forming stems. The Ichidan verbs are also known as the ru verbs, since the last ru kana is usually dropped or replaced. The one-step verb classification, Ichidan, is referred to the need of making only a single change to get every other stem, while the group 2 name is self-explanatory, as it only has iru and eru. When it comes to Godan verbs, their nickname, five-step verbs, comes from their adherence to the kana chart, a very strict adherence, I might add, when forming stems, while the U verbs classification means that the vowel U is the one we are constantly changing to get the stems. The group 1 term indirectly also references this, because their endings always have the U in their final syllable. For the purposes of this video and in the examples, I will be using the following terminology. I will be calling the first verbs Ichidan, the seconds Godan, and the third will be called the irregular verbs, simply because they come closest to the essence of these verbs and the way they form stems, making the entire process easier to remember. Now, the table given here is of paramount importance if we are to master the Godan verbs themselves. Every verb of the Godan type belongs to one of these subgroups, and the difference that exists between them is the most noticeable when forming the ta and te stem, one of the most frequent stems in the Japanese language that you can encounter in everyday conversation and texts. My recommendation is to simply pull out the dictionary and practice the information, because it is of vital importance. Also, it is very important as well to notice a change that occurs in the I group in the subgroup gu, and in the entire n group. Ta and te become da and de. We will see this in the section devoted to this stem, as well as in the Dojo drill video meant to further explore this phenomenon, so to speak, through practice and with numerous examples. Now, before we move on to the creation of the stems, here is a list of common verbs that appear as Ichidan verbs with their endings, but are in fact Godan verbs, acquiring their stems the same way as their Ru Godan peers. There is more of them, of course, but these are the most common ones that you may come across during your language studies or in everyday texts and conversations. These are kaeru, to return, kiru, to cut, kagiru, to be limited, mairu, to visit or come, shiru, to know, hairu, to enter, hashiru, to run, and keru, to kick. Finally, we have arrived to the stems section, and as you can see, here are all the verb stems listed, as well as their transcriptions and meanings. The forms they form, essentially, will be explored further in the future Dojo videos, but for the sake of completeness, I will mention a few of the most important ones. The Misen stem is what I like to call the MPC form, since it is commonly used in negation, passive, and causative. After that, the Renyo stem is the famous Masu form's stem, and it is also used to form desires as well as to act as a conjunction between clauses, so you can say that it is a rather flexible stem with a variety of usages. Jishoke is precisely that. The verb stem that you can find in the dictionaries, and it is basically the closest thing you can find in the Japanese language to the infinitive form. We will be also using this stem as our starting point when we practice and when I will show you the way you can form the rest of these stems. Now, the following kate stem is often called the ba conditional form or stem, since it is its most prevalent use. And finally, the remaining two stems, the volitional and imperative, are self-explanatory, forming verb forms that indicate a certain intention or an order. The ta and te forms are the most varied, with many different usages, from tense-like functions to conditionals, but they are also the most practical, and I suggest mastering them with specific care and determination. Now, instead of the vocabulary overview like we had in the previous videos, we have here the table of verbs I will be using to illustrate the stem formation process. Here you have a verb from every verb group and subgroup, along with all the necessary information such as the transcription, romaji, and verb class. And these verbs are from the Ichidan section, kuwaeru and miru, meaning to add and to see. Then the Godan section has shinu, to die, daku, to embrace or hug, korobu, to fall down, tsuru, to fish, horobosu, to destroy or ruin, warau, to laugh, kasegu, to make or earn money, takuramu, to plot or scheme, motsu, to have or own, sakeru, to avoid, that is an Ichidan, nomu, to drink, once again a Godan. The last two will be used in our examples when we explain how to form stems. And on that note, let's visit the first stem, the Iralis stem for our Ichidan verbs. As you can see, it's fairly simple to make it. First, pick a verb that is an Ichidan verb from your dictionary. I picked sakeru, meaning to avoid, and this verb will be used in all Ichidan stem formation examples. And in the second step, as you can see, we need to remove the final ru in order to get the Irrealis stem. So it's fairly simple. Pick a verb, remove ru, and you will get the Irrealis stem, meaning that sakeru becomes sake. And this stem, like we said, is mostly used in passive, causative, or negation. Now, let's see how Godan verbs make their Irrealis stems. First, pick a verb. I picked nomu. Like sakeru, it will be the verb that I will be using in all of the examples for the stem formation. Then change the vocal U of the final syllable to A and you will get the Iralis Stem, meaning that nomu will become noma. So the key word here is the change of the vocal in the final syllable from U to A. So in summary, after you pick the verb, you must perform the change and you will get the Irrealis Stem. And let's see how this reflects on our verbs that I have shown you in the verbs section. And here are their Iralis stems. We have kuvae and mi from our Ichidan section. After that we have shina, daka, koroba, tsura, horobosa, varava, kasega, takurama, and mota for our Godan section. And in the small blue table on the right, you can see the Iralis stems for our irregular verbs being ko and shi for kuru and suru. Now, the conjunctive stem for our Ichidan verbs is practically made in the identical fashion as we have made our Irrealis stems. First, we pick a verb, then we remove ru, and we will get the conjunctive stem. So once again, it is very simple. After you pick a verb, remove the final ru from it, and you will get the conjunctive stem, meaning that sakeru here will become once again sake. However, in the case of Godan verbs, the change is a little bit different, and I mean the entire process. Because we first pick a verb, nomu, and then we change the vocal U of the final syllable to I, and we will only then get the conjunctive stem, meaning that from nomu, nomi would be the conjunctive stem. So once again, the key is here to observe the second part of our process here, and that is to change the vocal of the final syllable to I. So U becomes I. And let's see the conjunctive stems of our verbs. Once again, in the Ichidan section, we don't see a lot of changes. We only see kuwai and mi. But in our Godan section, we see that a change has taken place. We have shini, daki, korobi, tsuri, horoboshi, barai, kasegi, takurami, and mochi. On the right, once again, ki and shi are the conjunctive stems for kuru and suru. And we are now moving to the dictionary stem for our Ichidan verbs, and you will see that it is the simplest one to make. Essentially, you pick a verb from your dictionary, do nothing with it. You don't need to add anything, you don't need to subtract anything, you don't need to change anything, and you will get the dictionary stem. So it's practically the easiest one to make. Now, this stem is mainly used to modify nouns when standing in front of them, and it is also found in dictionaries like its name states. The same thing goes for Godan verbs. Also pick a verb from a dictionary, do nothing with it, and you will get the dictionary stem. You can argue that Godan verbs follow the U part of the kana, and you wouldn't be wrong, but I think, that's my humble opinion, that by learning it this way, you will not have any difficulties in remembering it. So once again, pick a verb, do nothing with it, and you will get the dictionary stem. Now let's see it on the table. Once again, it's like the default table because everything is back to normal in a way, in a certain sense, of course. And on the right, we can see the same thing with our irregular verbs. And now we are moving on to something more interesting, and that is the conditional stem for our Ichidan verbs, or the one we call the ba form or the ba stem. How is that formed? Now we have here a little bit more to deal with. First, we pick a verb. Like I said, I picked sakeru. After that, we first remove the final ru, and then we add re, thus becoming sake re. Sakeru becomes sake re. So the most important thing here is to remove the final ru, then add re, and you are completely set, and you received already the conditional stem, sakere. So once again, sakeru becomes sakere because the final ru has been removed and replaced with re. And the conditional stem for our Godan verbs is once again a little bit different, but it follows the Kana chart, so that makes it kind of predictable. We pick a verb, after that we change the vocal U in the final syllable to E, and we will get the conditional stem, meaning that nomu becomes nome. And the most important thing here is once again the change that occurs in the final syllable from the vocal U to the vocal E. And once again, here is the table of our verbs in their conditional stems. We see that we have kuvaere and mire for our Ichidan verbs. Then for our Godan verbs, we have shine, dake, korobe, tsure, horobose, barae, kasege, takurame, and mote. And on the right, once again, kure and sure for our kuru and suru irregular verbs. Now the volitional stem for our Ichidan verbs is once again formed in the identical way as the Iralis and conjunction stem have been formed. We pick a verb, remove the final ru, and we get the volitional stem. So once again, sakeru has its ru removed and becomes sake. So sakeru becomes sake because we need to remove the final ru. And in the case of Godan verbs, as you can expect, once again there is a difference because the change of the U vocal is now taking place once again, and U becomes O in the final syllable. So we get the volitional stem nomo from nomu, meaning nomu becomes nomo. Just remember always to change the vocal U of the final syllable to O, as it is illustrated in the second step of the process, as you can see on your screen. So first pick a verb, perform the change, and you will get the volitional stem. So nomu will become nomo. And let's see this once again. On the table, we have kuvae and mi in our Ichidan section. After that, we have shino, dako, korobo, suro, horoboso, barao, kasego, takuramo, and moto. Once again, I'm showing here how they adhere to their respective kana parts. Here it is the O vocal, and you must remember that because it is really simple to remember once you accept that all Godan verbs adhere to the kana chart strictly. And once again, here is the table, our little blue table for the irregular verbs. It is ko and shi. And now we have the imperative stem for our Ichidan verbs. Once again, we have a game of elimination and addition. First, we pick a verb, once again sakeru. Then we remove the final ru and we add ro. Thus, sakeru becomes sakero. And this is how we get the imperative stem for our Ichidan verbs. First, remove ru and only that add ro. So that means sakeru becomes sakero. Once again, the second step is crucial. Always remember to remove final ru and add ro in its place. Now when it comes to Godan, you can probably guess that once again U becomes E. And this is the way we will get the imperative stem. So nomu becomes nome. Once again, we pick a verb, change the vocal U of the final syllable to E, and this is the way we will always end up with the imperative stem, if we require it, of course. And let's see this on the table. Now we have a whole lot of changes that have taken place. In the Ichidan section, we have kuvaero and miro. After that, in the Godan section, we have shine, dake, korobe, tsure, horobose, varae, kasege, takurame, and mote. And the irregular section of our little table reserved for kuru and suru would be koi and shiro on your right. And finally, we have arrived to the most interesting of all the stems. It's the tate stem, or you can refer to it as a separate ta stem and te stem. And let's see how is it made first for the ichidan verbs. We take our verb sakeru, remove the ru from it, and after that attach te or ta depending on your need and what you want to say. So it's fairly simple. Once again, like many of the previous stems, in the case of ichidan verbs, you only need to remove ru and after that add these two, depending of course on what you need. Now, in the case of Godan verbs, as you can probably already surmise from the title itself, there is a whole lot more to be careful of and to take care of when building this stem. First, when we pick a verb, our Godan verb, we must pay attention to the verb subgroup. And this is the most important part here, because all of the four subgroups that we have mentioned previously play a significant role when forming these two stems. I will refer to them as two stems from now on. Because in this case, we see that mu is a part of the n subtype of the Godan verbs, and that is why its mu becomes and after that ta and te also change to da and de. Now, this is the reason why nomu becomes non-de and non-da after the second step. So in the second step, we have essentially first determined the subgroup of our verb. After that, we have changed the final kana to its appropriate, let's say appropriate form, that is the n here, or in the case of the other three groups, it will be the small tsu, the I, or she, and after that we have added the ta and te, or in this case they have been changed into da and de. So once again, the most important thing here is really to completely master the subgroup system, because it is of vital importance here when you are trying to form these two stems. And let's see this on our table. But this time I would like to simply mention that our last two verbs on this table are our irregular verbs, suru and kuru. We see them as shite, shita, and kite, kita. And in the case of our ichidan verbs, once again, the first two from the top, it's kuwaete, kuwaeta, and mite, mita. And here we can observe this subgroup Godan at play, the subgroup kind of nature to them, as we have shinde, shinda, daite, daita, koronde, koronda, tsute, tsuta, horoboshite, horoboshita, baratte, baratta, kaseide, kaseida, takurande, takuranda, motte, motta. Once again, I cannot stress this enough. You should really pull out the dictionary you have and practice the change and the stem formation of Godan verbs. So you only need to make them every day and routine of your everyday routine. You need to make them to at least change 5 to 10 of them per day, and through that habit you will build up slowly an automatic method of discerning to which group, subgroup in this case, to which subgroup every verb belongs to. So when you see let's say, for example, kaku, meaning to write, you will automatically know that it is a Godan verb belonging to the ku subgroup, meaning to the I subgroup in this case, meaning that its forms would be kaite and kaita. And finally, it is the time for the finishing blow of our today's lesson. As you can see from these two tables, this is the summary of what we have covered today. First, we have covered the verb types, ichidan verbs, Godan verbs, and irregular verbs. After that, we have covered their stems, the Iralis stems, the conjunctive stems, the dictionary stems, conditional, volitional, imperative, and the ta and te stems. Also, you can see that I have provided additional examples of these verbs, and especially in the lower table, you can see the examples for matsu and miru. As you can see, the Iralis stem, the conjunctive stem, the volitional stem are simply formed by removing the final ru in the case of ichidan verbs, but the dictionary stem is the one where ru remains, while in the conditional stem and the imperative stem, the ru has been replaced with re and ro, while of course the ta and te stem have also been divested the verb of its ru ending and can be replaced with ta or te depending on what you need. While in the case of motsu, being it because it is essentially a Godan verb, we see that it follows the kana chart of ta, chi, tsu, te, to, te, and after that, of course, the change, because matsu belongs to the tsu subgroup. After that, we see mo, te, and its ta form would be mo, ta. And above, we see that Godan verbs are divided into three main categories. I group them in this manner. Maybe it's, let's just say, my own opinion, the easiest way to remember them. The first group is utsuru, the second is kugusu, and mu, nu, bu. Of course, I would just like to highlight that su has different way of forming the ta and te from ku and gu, but let's say that it has a certain catchy sound when you try to remember them in this way. And finally, otsukare-sama deshita, Shokun. Congratulations on your determination and strength to see this video to the very end. Like I said at the beginning, this is an incredibly important topic that requires a lot of practice to master, but in order to make that easier for you, I will create a dojo drill video for you to hammer these verbs to perfection and to learn a few new ones along the way, because it is very important to always expand your vocabulary and keep it fresh. Just remember that incessant practice always yields results in the study process of the Japanese language. So, dear Shokun, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again in the dojo next time. Sayonara!